there is a moment. It's not dramatic, nor does it come with any clear sign. It's not preceded by any ceremony. It just happens. And when it happens, you realize, with a silent, almost disconcerting strangeness, that something inside you is no longer what it used to be. Not because you did something different this morning, not because the world around you visibly rearranged itself, not because you finally reached the right conclusion after searching for so long, but because you changed. And that difference, that subtle, almost undetectable difference at the heart of it all, is the most real thing you've ever felt in your life. You are here now, and maybe you came across this video carrying something. I don't need to know exactly what. You know, perhaps it's that situation that hasn't yet resolved itself in the way you expected, that version of yourself that you keep trying to reach, as if it were always one step ahead, always beyond the next effort, beyond the next understanding, beyond the next change that hasn't yet come. Perhaps it's a specific kind of tiredness, not physical tiredness. The other kind, the weariness of always arriving, but never truly arriving. But what if I told you that the version you're looking for, isn't it ahead? What if it already exists? Not as potential, not as a future promise, not as a reward for those who persevere long enough, but as a presence, now, here, within. This is not motivation, this is not instruction, this is not a new technique that you will need to learn and apply. This is a souvenir from something that you, on some deeper, quieter, older level than any thought about yourself, I already knew. And as you listen to this now, as these words find a place within you, not in the part that analyzes, not in the part that evaluates, but in the quieter part, the part that simply you can tell when something is true, something is moving, subtly, but definitely. The change has already happened. How long did you wait? I'm not asking as an accusation. I'm asking because I know what that wait is like. That specific waiting, that particular tension of living in the space between what is and what you deeply feel could be. You wake up in the morning, and for a brief second, just a second, before everything settles back down, you forget. You are not the problem. You are not what is missing. You are not the one who hasn't arrived yet. And then the memory returns. Slowly or quickly, it returns. And with it, that familiar weight that almost doesn't feel like weight. It feels like the normal state of things. It feels like you. Not exactly pain, not exactly fear. Something more akin to incompleteness. It's as if there was a version of you that existed before all of this, before all the doubts set in, before you started wondering if you were doing it right, being enough, going in the right direction, and you spent so much time trying to get back to that version or to reach her. Sometimes you're not even sure which is which anymore. You searched. God, how did you research? Videos, books, concepts, systems, frameworks to understand the mind, to reprogram the subconscious, to align your vibration, to let go of what no longer serves you, to attract what you desire, to become who you were meant to be. You learned about the subconscious and how it governs everything you can't see. You learned about limiting beliefs and how to identify, undo, and replace them. You learned about identity, frequency, the power of being present, surrender, intention, and permission. And each new thing you learned brought a brief sense of relief. Ah, that's it. Now I understand the missing piece. And then, something didn't fit the way it should. Either it would fit for a while and then fall back into place, or you would genuinely feel closer, and then, for reasons you couldn't quite name, it would seem farther away. And somewhere within that cycle, not right at the beginning, but after enough time had passed, a very quiet voice began to emerge. He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. What if the problem is me? What if there's something about me that just isn't working the way it should? What if, for some reason, I haven't yet been able to identify? I'm unable to do that. You don't need to confirm this out loud, but you recognize that voice. And she wasn't there because you're weak. She wasn't there because you were wrong in some fundamental way. It was there because you spent so much time looking outward at circumstances, at results, at external signs that something was indeed changing, that you gradually, almost without realizing it, lost the thread back inward. And then there were the standards, the old patterns that kept reappearing, the same dynamic with different people, the same inner feeling in completely different scenarios, the same quality of experience repeating itself, regardless of how much you had worked, searched, or understood. And each time a pattern returned, there was a specific exasperation in that repetition. Why? Again? After all this? As if the recurrence of a pattern were definitive proof of failure, as if the return of an old feeling meant that nothing had really changed. But what if that weren't the case? What if the patterns that kept appearing weren't evidence that you hadn't changed, but simply that the change was still looking for a firm place to settle? Because there is a difference, and it's a huge one, even if subtle in appearance, between to understand something and to be something. You can know all the maps of a place without ever having set foot on its ground. You can understand the physics of flight with technical precision without your feet ever having left the ground even once. You can know, with impressive intellectual clarity, who you are or could be, without yet truly inhabiting that identity, without it being your internal address. And it was during that time that you stayed, not for lack of effort, not for lack of intelligence or genuine intention, but because what was being sought was, in general, a change in behavior, in action, in thought. And real change doesn't begin in any of those places. It starts earlier. It begins with identity. There is a difference between a person who wants being confident and a person who trusting. It's not in the posture. It's not in the words you choose. It's not in the specific actions you take. It is at the origin of where all of this comes from. A person who wants to be confident acts to prove she is confident, especially to herself. Every action carries within it an implicit question. Did it work? Did it seem real? Did anyone believe it? A confident person acts because they simply are. There is no effort involved in the origin. It is merely the natural expression of something that already exists. And here's something that seems too simple to be true. And that's why it breeds distrust. Because we've learned to distrust the simple after spending so much time seeking the complex. You don't need to become the version you're looking for. You need to recognize that it already exists. Now. Not after more time spent working on the inner world. Not after the next session, the next video, the next level of understanding, not after the results finally appear as proof. Now, I know exactly what's going on in your mind right now. She's looking for the problem. But what if I'm not ready yet? But what if my standards are still there? But what if external circumstances don't yet reflect that? But what if I'm mistaken? And this search for but, this automatic, almost reflexive resistance, is precisely the mechanism that maintains the distance between you and who you already are. Because identity doesn't function as an achievement. It's not a prize you receive after enough effort. It functions as recognition, like the act of looking at something that was there all along and finally see. Think about that for a moment. When you remember who you are, not who you've been conditioned to be, not who fear has gradually shaped you over the years, not who difficult circumstances have defined you in your worst moments, but who are you in the absence of any stories about yourself? What remains? There's no need for a verbal answer to that question. It's not an intellectual one. It's a matter of feeling, and what most people feel when they are quiet for long enough, when they stop actively searching for a moment, is this: a stillness, a presence that needs no justification, a quality of to be that exists before any thought about what you should or shouldn't be. This is not abstraction. This is not spiritual language disconnected from real experience. This is the most concrete and direct experience there is. That is you, before all the narrative, before all the story of who you are not yet, who you should become, who you are trying to leave behind. That's you. And the change you were looking for is not an addition to that. It's not something you build on top of. It's not a new layer you put over who you are. It is a return. That's it. With fewer layers. With fewer stories that weren't yours to begin with fewer definitions borrowed from experiences that are already in the past. Real change isn't built. It's a revelation. Here's what happens when an identity truly changes. It's not that a person wakes up one day and consciously decides to be different from now on. It's not that she finds the right technique and applies it with enough discipline. It's that, at some point, sometimes imperceptible at the moment it happens, it's simply stop identifying with the older version of herself. The old story loses the emotional weight that made it real, that made it heavy, that made it true in the body. And when a story loses its emotional impact, it ceases to generate reality. Stop creating patterns. Stop coloring perception. Stop attracting situations that seemed inevitable. Have you ever experienced this? Perhaps something smaller, a situation that bothered you deeply, and then, one day, you realized it simply didn't bother you anymore. You didn't directly work for this. You didn't wake up determined not to bother anymore. At some point, something internal settled differently, and the situation remained. But you were no longer the same person in relation to it. That's how it works, and that's how it's working now. As you listen to this, as something within you recognizes these words, not as new information that needs to be processed and stored, but as something that was already there, waiting to be named. Identity is changing, and this is not due to the strength of this video, nor to the power of words, however much space they may create. Yes, but through the power of recognition, because genuine recognition of who you are not as an idea, but as vivid sensation. It's the only change that has ever mattered, and it's already happening. Reality is a mirror. Don't interpret this as poetic metaphor, nor as aspirational language. In fact, it's like an accurate description of how things work. What you perceive in the world around you is not objective and inert reality. That's the reality, filtered by your identity, based on what you believe is possible, based on what you hope to find, based on what you are attuned to perceive. Two different eyes in the same place at the same time see completely different things, not because one is wrong, but because each is filtering the experience through the lens of what it was, what they believe, and what they are looking for. When identity changes, the filter changes. And when the filter changes, what you perceive changes. Not because the outside world magically rearranged itself to suit his new vision, but because you start to see what was there all along, and that the old filter simply wouldn't let it reach consciousness. The opportunities that already existed but seemed closed. The people who were already around but who seemed unreachable. The qualities within yourself that were already present but seemed absent. Like light in a room whose windows you had never thought to open. There's a mechanism in the nervous system called the Reticular Activating System. It is the filter through which your brain decides, at every moment, what is relevant enough to reach conscious awareness. Of all the millions of stimuli that reach you every second, only a tiny fraction gets through, and what determines this fraction is, to a large extent, its identity. What you believe yourself to be, what you believe you deserve, what you believe is possible for someone like you. When you buy a car of a specific model, suddenly you start seeing that model everywhere you go. He wasn't hiding before. He was there all along, but he wasn't relevant so that your identity can be established. Now it is, and then you see it. That's how it works with everything. With the people who appear in your life, with the doors you realize are open, with how others respond to you, with the quality of the situations that come your way. When you begin to identify yourself, not as a repeated statement without feeling, but as certainty of identity that resides in the body, like a person for whom certain things are simply true. The nervous system begins to find evidence of this everywhere, not because you're creating comfortable illusions, but because reality has always been more responsive, more alive, more porous than you've been led to believe. She's always been waiting to find out who you are, and here is something that is not merely intellectual understanding. It is something that needs to be felt. Reality doesn't change because you force it. She changes because you no longer need to force her. There is a huge difference, which the body feels even when the mind is not yet able to articulate, between acting from despair and acting from identity. Acting out of desperation has a specific texture. It's tense at its core. It has the quality of someone rushing to prove something, to secure something, to prevent something bad from happening. I need this to change, so I'm going to do everything I can to force that change. And reality responds to this tension with resistance, because tension itself is the message that something is wrong. Acting on identity has a completely different texture. It is clean at its origin. There is no unnecessary urgency. There is only the natural movement of someone expressing what already is. This is already true for me, so my actions naturally reflect that, and reality responds to this with flux. Have you ever felt that flow? Those days when everything seemed to fall into place in a way you hadn't planned. When things came to you without you having to go and get them with that specific effort, when you were somehow no rhythm of something that doesn't have a precise name but is unmistakably real when you're in it. These days were not accidents. It wasn't statistical luck. There were days when your identity, for some reason you may not have realized at the time, was aligned with who you truly are, and reality responded to that without resistance, without that invisible friction that makes everything harder than it should be. This state is no exception. It is the natural state of an identity that is at peace with itself. The work, if there is any work, is not about creating this state from scratch. It's about removing whatever is blocking what's already there. It's not about adding more. Remover. And what's blocking it, most of the time, isn't as complex as it seems. It's the insistence that you haven't arrived yet, the belief, held with surprising firmness at times, that something needs to happen, first so that you can finally inhabit who you are. Let it settle. The insistence that you haven't arrived yet, the belief that there's a condition that hasn't been met, a result that hasn't been confirmed yet, proof that hasn't been presented yet. This insistence is not humility, much less sensible realism. She is the only obstacle left, because the version you're looking for isn't waiting for specific conditions to exist. She is not waiting for external results to come first. She is not waiting for the complete absence of doubt. She is not waiting for the moment when everything around her finally falls into place. It exists now, and he's waiting for just one thing. Stop looking for her as if she were gone. The change has already happened. I'm not saying this as encouragement. I'm not saying it as an emotional state technique or as an affirmation you should repeat until you believe it. I'm saying this because it's true. The moment something inside you recognized, even if just for a second, even if only partially, even with doubt swirling around like fog, that you don't need to become who you are. Something has changed, not in a way that you can show someone, not in a way that is measurable this afternoon, but in a real way. Identity began to reorganize itself around this recognition. You are already that version, not the perfect version. That doesn't exist and never has for anyone. Not the version that never falters. That's fiction too. Not the version that never feels fear or doubt or the weight of a difficult day. But this is the version you are looking for. The version that doesn't need external validation to know what's true about itself. The version that isn't waiting for permission from any circumstance to fully inhabit its own life. The version that acts not to prove something to itself or to anyone else, but because it is naturally, simply who it is. You are already that version. Not tomorrow, not when the results appear as confirmation, not when the doubts completely disappear, not when everything around you is finally aligned the way you imagined it needed to be. Now, feel this for a moment, not as a thought to be evaluated, as a feeling to be received. There is a place in the body, different for each person, but you know where it is. that responds to truth in a way that the mind cannot imitate. Forget intellectual truth, the kind that can be debated and questioned. Yes, to the truth, felt, this place that relaxes when something finally falls into place. That opens up when an old tension you didn't even know you were carrying is finally released. That expands gently when you stop fighting against what simply is. Go to that place now, effortlessly, just with attention, just by being kind enough to allow yourself to be here for a moment. And let this happen. I already am. This is not a statement to be repeated mechanically. It's a recognition that should be felt. I already am the person who no longer needs to defend themselves internally, the person who doesn't need circumstances to align first to begin living the life they want to be in, the person who carries within themselves the silent certainty of what is true about them, regardless of what is happening outside. I already am. And the reality is reorganizing itself around this, effortlessly, without you needing to monitor, manage, or confirm every single moment, but inevitably, because identity and reality are not separated by an abyss that needs to be crossed with sufficient effort. They are two sides of the same movement. When identity is based on something true, truly true, not performatively asserted, but felt as real in the body, reality is beginning to reflect this, not at some undetermined time in the future, in the age of identity, and that time is always now. You don't need to wait for the results to know that the change has happened. Results are a consequence. Identity is the cause. You're already on board. The effects are only a matter of time, and that time is already in motion. And what about the questions that will still arise? Because they will show up. Not because the change wasn't real, but because the mind has memory, and memory has habit. She will try to take you back to what was familiar. She will present evidence from the past as if it were definitive proof of the present. She will ask, in that specific voice, "But have you really changed? What about the evidence? What about the proof?" And the answer of someone who has already recognized themselves, is not to defend oneself. It's not about arguing. It's not about trying to convince the mind that it's wrong. It's simply not going calmly, without drama, with the serene indifference of someone who knows what they know and doesn't need to waste energy convincing anyone, not even themselves, because true identity doesn't need to be justified. It doesn't need external evidence to be real. It doesn't need approval from the doubting party to exist. It doesn't need the whole world around it to confirm it before it's fully present. She simply is. And when you find that place within yourself, that place that simply and without needing proof, without needing permission, you perceive something with surprisingly simple clarity. He's always been here, waiting, not because you become a different person, but because you stopped running away from who you've always been. The change has already happened. Feel it in your body now, not in thought, in the body, the version you were looking for. This is the version that's here right now, listening to this. Reality is responding to that. The circumstances that are arising are a consequence of this. The doors that are opening, some already visible, others that you will only notice when you get close enough to see them, are a reflection of this. Not because you finally did everything right, not because you finally deserved it, not because the universe finally decided it was its turn, but because you, at this moment, have stopped resisting who you already are. And that's the only change that has ever mattered. You'll leave here, and life will go on. The chores will still be there. The conversations will continue. The uncertainties that remain unresolved will persist. The people you love, the situations that are still unfolding, the questions that still lack clear answers. All of this continues, but something changed. Not in this world, in you. And because it has changed within you, genuinely, not as a concept, but as an experience, it will change in the world. Not necessarily by force, not in the way you imagined it would have to be, but in a real way, in the most realistic way possible. You'll notice things you didn't notice before. You'll feel lightness in places where there was accumulated weight. You'll respond differently to what previously completely captivated you, not because you will consciously strive to be different, but because you are different. You already are different. That is all. There is no urgent next step. There is no exercise you need to do right now. There is no immediate work you need to start today. Just that, this moment, this specific stillness, this clarity that needs nothing more to be what it is. You are who you are, completely, now. Reality knows this. She's already responding. You don't need to carry anything else. There is nothing left to prove. The change has already happened.